I never thought I would be sharing this story at this stage of my life. But sometimes the truth sits quietly inside you for years, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. I was 23 when I got married. Back then, I believed love was simple. You meet someone, you fall in love, you build a life together, and everything just works. That's what I saw in movies, and honestly, that's what I hoped for. My husband, Daniel, was a calm man. Not very expressive, not very talkative, but steady. I used to tell my friends, he makes me feel safe. And I truly believed that was enough for a lifetime. Our early days were peaceful. Not exciting, not dramatic, just quiet. We lived in a small apartment with thin walls and a tiny kitchen. I remember standing there one evening, trying to cook pasta for the first time after marriage. I burned it so badly that the whole place smelled for hours. Daniel came home, took one look at the pot, and just smiled. He didn't complain. He didn't laugh either. He simply said, "We'll order something tonight." At that moment, I felt lucky. I thought, this is what a good husband looks like. But now, when I look back, I realize something I didn't understand back then. Silence can feel peaceful, but it can also hide distance. In the beginning, I didn't notice it. We had a routine. He went to work early. I stayed home for a while, trying to figure out what kind of life I wanted. In the evenings, we ate dinner together, usually in front of the television. Sometimes we talked, but most of the time we just sat there. And I told myself, this is normal. This is what marriage becomes after the excitement fades. Maybe some of you have felt this too. That quiet shift, where love doesn't disappear, but it stops speaking. There was one night I still remember very clearly. It was raining outside, the kind of soft rain that makes everything feel slow. I had spent the whole day alone, and for some reason, I felt heavier than usual. Not sad exactly, just empty. When Daniel came home, I tried to talk to him. I don't even remember what I said, something small, something unimportant. But I remember how he responded. He nodded, gave short answers, then turned on the TV, and that was it. No fight, no argument, just distance. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and asked myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. Is this what the rest of my life will feel like? But I pushed that thought away, because I was young, and when you're young, you believe you have time to fix things later. Days turned into months, months turned into years, and slowly, without realizing it, I stopped trying. That was my first mistake. Not a big dramatic mistake, not something you can point at and say, that's where everything went wrong. It was smaller than that. I stopped speaking my feelings. I stopped asking questions. I stopped expecting anything more. I became comfortable in silence. At first, it felt easier. No conflict, no disappointment, just peace. But peace without connection starts to feel like loneliness. I remember one Sunday morning. The sun was coming through the window and everything looked beautiful, quiet, calm. Daniel was sitting with his coffee, reading something on his phone. I was across from him, just watching him. And suddenly I realized something that shook me. I didn't know what he was thinking. I didn't know what made him happy anymore. I didn't even know if he knew what I was feeling. We were living in the same house, but in different worlds. Have you ever felt that? Sitting next to someone you love and still feeling alone? That realization stayed with me the whole day. But again, I said nothing. Because by then, silence had become a habit, and habits are dangerous in a marriage. Not the loud ones, but the quiet ones. There was another moment, a small one, but it stayed with me. It was our anniversary. I had been thinking about it all week. Not in a big way, just hoping for something small. Maybe a conversation, maybe a memory, maybe just a little effort. That evening, Daniel came home like any other day. No mention of the date, no change in routine. We ate dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. And I remember lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something break inside me, very quietly. Not anger, not even sadness, just disappointment. But I didn't say anything. The next morning, he left for work, and I smiled like everything was fine. That was my second mistake, pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. You see, when you keep ignoring your feelings, they don't disappear. They just settle deeper inside you, and over time, they change you. I became quieter, colder in some ways, not intentionally, but slowly. I stopped sharing my thoughts with him. I stopped waiting for him to understand me. I started telling myself, this is just how marriage is. And maybe some of you have told yourselves the same thing. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't have the courage to face it. Years passed like this. Not bad years, not terrible, just empty in places where there should have been warmth. And then one evening, something happened that I still think about to this day. It wasn't a big event. No shouting, no dramatic moment, just a simple sentence. But that sentence made me realize the biggest mistake I had made in my 20s. That night, as I sat there in silence, I finally understood something about my marriage, something I had been avoiding for years. And that realization changed everything. As I sat there that night, that realization stayed in my mind like a quiet voice I could no longer ignore. Daniel had just said something very simple. He looked at me, almost casually, and said, "You've changed." That was it. No anger, no blame, just a calm observation. But for some reason, those words hit me harder than anything else ever had. At first, I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say, "Of course I've changed. Life changes people." But the words didn't come out. Instead, I just sat there, looking at him, feeling something strange inside my chest. Because deep down, I knew he wasn't completely wrong. But what hurt me the most was not what he said. It was what I realized in that moment. He had noticed I changed, but he never noticed why. And maybe I never gave him the chance to. That night, after he went to sleep, I stayed awake for hours. I kept thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who laughed easily, the one who wanted to talk about everything, the one who believed love meant sharing your heart without fear. And then I thought about the woman I had become. Quiet, careful, always holding something back. Somewhere along the way, I had built a wall. Not because Daniel told me to, but because it felt easier than feeling ignored. Maybe some of you understand this feeling. When you try to express yourself and you don't get the response you hoped for, so you slowly stop trying. Not all at once, just little by little, until silence becomes your comfort zone. The next morning, I made a decision. A small one, but it felt big to me. I decided I would talk to him. Not about anything dramatic, not about years of feelings all at once, just something honest. That evening, when he came home, I tried again. I asked him about his day, not in the usual quick way, but genuinely. He looked a little surprised, but he answered. Then I told him something about my day, too. A small story, nothing important. He listened. But after a few minutes, the conversation faded again. It didn't turn into anything deeper, and I remember feeling that same disappointment creeping back. That was when I almost gave up again. But something inside me said, no, not this time. So I tried again the next day, and the day after that. Sometimes it worked a little, sometimes it didn't. There were moments when he seemed more present, and then there were moments when he felt far away again. It was confusing, because I couldn't tell if things were improving or if I was just hoping they would. One evening, I tried to go a little deeper. I asked him, "Do you ever feel like we don't talk the way we used to?" He paused for a moment, and then he said something that stayed with me for years. He said, "I thought you liked it this way." I didn't know how to respond, because in a strange way, he wasn't wrong. I had created this silence too. I had stopped sharing. I had stopped asking. I had taught him, without realizing it, that this distance was okay. That realization was painful, because it meant I couldn't blame everything on him. Marriage is not just about what the other person does. It's also about what we allow. And I had allowed this quiet distance to grow between us. That night, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, lying on my side of the bed while he slept next to me. I wasn't crying because I didn't love him. I was crying because I didn't know how to reach him anymore. Or maybe I didn't know how to reach the version of us we used to be. Days passed, and I kept trying. Small efforts, small conversations. But something inside me was still unsettled, because deep down, I started to realize something even harder. It wasn't just about communication. It was about timing. I had entered marriage too young, without understanding what it really needed. I thought love was enough. But love, without effort, without communication, without growth, slowly fades into routine. And routine, without connection, becomes loneliness. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way we sat in the same room but lived in separate thoughts. The way we avoided deeper conversations. The way important feelings were replaced with simple, daily routines. And the more I noticed, the harder it became to ignore. There was one moment that made everything even clearer. We were at a family gathering. Everyone was laughing, talking, sharing stories. I was sitting there, smiling, pretending to be part of it. And someone asked me a simple question. "How's married life?" I smiled and said, "It's good." But inside, I felt something break again, because for the first time I realized I didn't know if that was true. That night, when we got home, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I looked around at our home. Everything looked fine. Everything looked normal. But inside me, something was restless. I finally turned to him and said, "Can we talk?" He looked at me, a little surprised again, but he nodded. We sat down, and for the first time in years, I didn't hold back. I told him I felt distant. I told him I missed us. I told him I didn't want to live like roommates. My voice was shaking, but I kept going. He listened, really listened, and when I finished, there was a long silence. But this silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of things we had never said before. Then he said something that I didn't expect. He said, "I thought everything was fine because you never said anything." That sentence stayed with me because it showed me the truth I had been avoiding. Silence doesn't fix problems. It hides them. And the longer you hide them, the harder they become to face. That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't suddenly bring us closer. But it opened something. A door that had been closed for years. And for the first time, I felt a small sense of hope. But at the same time, I also felt fear, because I knew something now that I couldn't ignore anymore. If we didn't truly change, if we didn't rebuild what we had lost, then one day we might wake up and realize it's too late. And that thought scared me more than anything else. If we didn't truly change, if we didn't rebuild what we had lost, then one day we might wake up and realize it's too late. That thought stayed with me in the days that followed. For the first time in years, I became very aware of everything between us. Not just the big things, but the small ones too. The way we spoke, the way we avoided eye contact sometimes, the way silence filled the room, even when we were sitting right next to each other. It felt like I had been asleep for a long time, and now I was finally awake. And once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. I started making more effort, not in a desperate way, but in a conscious way. I tried to be present. I tried to listen more carefully when he spoke. I tried to bring small moments of connection back into our daily life. One evening, I made his favorite dinner. Nothing fancy, just something I knew he liked. When he came home, he noticed. He smiled a little and said, "This looks nice." It was a small moment, but it meant more to me than I expected. We sat down and ate together, without the TV this time. At first, it felt a bit uncomfortable, like we didn't quite know what to say. But then he started talking about something from work. I listened, really listened. And then I shared something too. For a few minutes, it felt like the old days, simple, natural. But even in that moment, I felt something else. A quiet question inside me. Why did we let this disappear in the first place? Maybe some of you have asked yourselves that question too. How something that once felt so natural slowly becomes so difficult. In the weeks that followed, we had more conversations like that. Some were light, some were deeper, and some were uncomfortable. There were moments when old feelings came up, things we had ignored for years, small disappointments, unspoken expectations. At times it felt like we were opening a box we had kept closed for too long, and not everything inside it was easy to face. One night I told him something I had never said before. I said, "There were times I felt alone, even when you were right next to me." He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He just listened. And after a long pause, he said quietly, "I didn't know." That sentence stayed with me because it was honest, not perfect, not comforting, but real. And I realized something in that moment. Sometimes people don't hurt us because they don't care. Sometimes they hurt us because they don't see what we never showed them. That realization was heavy, but also freeing in a strange way, because it meant there was still something we could change. But change is not easy. It takes time. It takes patience. And sometimes it takes facing parts of yourself that you don't like. As we kept trying, I also started noticing something else. I had lost a part of myself over the years, not because of him, but because I had slowly stopped being the person I once was. I stopped doing things I enjoyed. I stopped expressing my thoughts openly. I stopped being me. And I think, in some quiet way, that affected our marriage too. Because when you lose yourself, you also lose a part of what you bring into a relationship. One afternoon, I found an old notebook while cleaning. It had some of my thoughts from years ago, little things I used to write, dreams, ideas, even small plans I once had for my life. I sat there, flipping through the pages, and I felt a deep sense of loss, not for my marriage, but for myself. I realized that I had been so focused on keeping things calm, avoiding conflict, maintaining peace, that I had slowly disappeared in the process. And that was another mistake I made in my 20s. I thought being a good wife meant staying quiet. I thought love meant adjusting, even when it cost me my own voice. But love should never require you to lose yourself. That day, I made another decision. Not just to work on my marriage, but to find myself again. I started small. I began writing again. Just a few lines each day. Nothing perfect, nothing important. Just honest thoughts. At first it felt strange, like talking to a part of me I hadn't heard from in years. But slowly, it started to feel natural again, and something inside me began to wake up. I also started sharing more with Daniel, not just about daily things, but about my thoughts, my feelings, my memories. Some days he listened deeply. Other days he didn't respond the way I hoped. And that was hard. Because when you start opening up again, you become vulnerable. But this time, I didn't shut down. I kept going, because I knew now that silence would only take me back to where I had been. There was one evening that felt different from all the others. We were sitting together, and for no particular reason, I started telling him a story from my childhood. Something small, something simple. He listened, and then he smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen in a long time. And then he said, "I miss hearing you like this." That sentence touched me deeply, because it reminded me of something important. We hadn't completely lost each other. We had just drifted. And maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. But even with that hope, there was still a quiet fear inside me, because I knew something now that I couldn't ignore. Not all distance can be fixed easily. Not all lost time can be recovered. And sometimes, even when two people try, things don't go back to the way they were. One night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about a question I had avoided for years. What if we are trying too late? That question didn't have an easy answer, and the truth is, it scared me. Because I didn't just want a peaceful marriage anymore. I wanted a real one. A connected one, a meaningful one. and I didn't know if we still had enough time or enough strength to build that again. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to silence. I couldn't go back to pretending, because now I had finally seen the truth. And once you see the truth, your life can never feel the same again. And once you see the truth, your life can never feel the same again. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about everything we had been through, the quiet years, the distance, the small efforts we were making now, and the question that stayed in my mind, was it enough? In the days that followed, I noticed something changing, not just in our conversations, but in the way we looked at each other. There was more awareness, more pauses, more moments where it felt like we were both thinking the same thing, but didn't know how to say it. One evening, we were sitting together in the living room. No television, no phones, just silence. But not the old kind of silence. This one felt intentional. He looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about how we used to be?" I smiled a little and said, "I think about it more than I should." He nodded slowly, and then he said something I had never heard from him before. I didn't realize we were losing that. That sentence stayed with me, because for years I believed I was the only one who felt the distance. But in that moment, I understood something different. We had both felt it. We had just experienced it in silence. And maybe that was the real problem. Not the distance itself, but the fact that we never talked about it while it was growing. That night, we talked for a long time. Not perfectly, not like a movie scene where everything gets resolved, but honestly. We spoke about the early years, the small disappointments, the expectations we never shared, the habits we slowly built without realizing. There were moments when my voice shook. There were moments when he went quiet for a long time, but neither of us walked away, and that in itself felt like progress. At one point, I asked him something that had been sitting in my heart for years. "Did you ever feel lonely in our marriage?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down, took a deep breath, and then said softly, "Yes, but I didn't know how to say it." That answer broke something inside me. Not in a painful way this time, but in a way that made me see everything more clearly. We were two people, feeling the same emptiness, sitting right next to each other, and saying nothing. Maybe some of you listening have felt this too, being close, but not truly connected, living together, but not really sharing your inner world. It's a quiet kind of pain, one that doesn't show on the outside, but slowly changes everything on the inside. That conversation didn't fix our marriage overnight. It didn't suddenly turn everything into happiness, but it did something more important. It made us aware, and awareness is where real change begins. In the weeks that followed, we continued talking. Not every day, not perfectly, but more than before. We started asking each other small questions. How was your day, really? What are you thinking about? Is there anything you've been holding inside? Sometimes the answers were simple, sometimes they were deeper, and sometimes we didn't have answers at all. But we stayed in the conversation, and that mattered. I also kept working on myself. I kept writing. I kept reflecting. I kept reminding myself that my voice mattered, even if it felt uncomfortable to use it. Slowly, something inside me started to feel lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I was no longer silent. There was one moment, a very quiet one, that I will never forget. We were sitting outside one evening. The air was calm, the sky was soft with the colors of sunset, and for no reason at all, he reached for my hand. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, just a simple gesture, but it meant more than words, because it felt real, not forced, not expected, just natural. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes rebuilding a marriage is not about big changes. It's about small, honest moments, repeated over time. But even with all this, I have to be honest with you. Not everything goes back to the way it was. Some things change permanently. Some parts of the past stay in the past. And maybe that's not a bad thing, because the goal is not to go back. The goal is to grow with what you've learned. Looking back now, I can clearly see the biggest mistake I made in my 20s. It wasn't marrying young. It wasn't choosing the wrong person. It was staying silent when I should have spoken. It was ignoring my feelings when I should have understood them. It was believing that love could survive without communication. And if there is one thing I have learned from all of this, it's this. Marriage is not built on big moments. It is built on small, everyday conversations, on honesty, on effort, on the courage to say what you feel, even when it's uncomfortable. Because silence may keep the peace for a while, but in the long run, it slowly takes away the connection. Maybe some of you listening have been married for many years. Maybe you have felt that quiet distance too. And if you have, I just want to say this gently. It's never too late to speak. It's never too late to try. Even a small conversation can open a door that has been closed for years. And sometimes, that's all it takes to begin again. As for me, I don't have a perfect ending to this story. Our marriage is still a journey, still growing, still learning. But one thing is different now. We don't stay silent anymore. And that has made all the difference. Looking back, I realize that marriage teaches us lessons we never expect. And sometimes those lessons come much later in life. But when they do, they have the power to change everything.